The Independent Police Complaints Commission is investigating the death of Mark Duggan in a fatal shooting between two officers and Mr. Duggan. Euronews explains.
On Saturday, a small crowd, including Mark Duggan's mother and fiancé, gathered outside a Tottenham police station to demand a senior officer explain how Mark had been shot dead by police. After hours of waiting outside, no explanation was forthcoming. Police say Duggan, an alleged drug dealer and gang member, shot at them when they attempted to arrest him. But forensic evidence for the moment points to only police ammunition being used at the crime scene. The family left and the small crowd's patience exploded. 2 police cars were set on fire, the first material victims and the initial targets of locals' anger. Today, the police apologised to the family for their handling of the situation. That apology comes too late for all those small businesses facing ruin and the scores of people who've lost everything as their homes burned over the following 3 days of rioting, violence that might have been avoided with a more diplomatic approach. What started as a local protest mushroomed out of control as outsiders via social networks and mobile phones realised there was looting to be done as an overstretched police couldn't be everywhere at once. As word got round, robbery and rioting flared in other areas of the capital, as mainly young masked people cashed in on the chaos. So much for the purely criminal aspects, but many say other underlying causes of the riots are poor parenting, unemployment, poor job prospects, austerity cuts removing many support mechanisms, especially for the young, and poverty, denying a generation the electronic gadgets and clothes it has been persuaded are essential to be somebody.
So, the first flash riot of the 21st century has created a circle of fire around London and many other cities within Britain and England. So, what should be done? Well, the first thing is we should have a look at how these riots were organised, because they're using not only Blackberries and Facebook and Twitter, but also levels of encryption which show that there is some sophistication behind the riots. So that is one element, and the riots themselves, although Mark Duggan was the genesis of the riots, have become about something completely different. It's become about a criminal society in terms of, or the criminality in our society, testing the will of the state, the will of the nation to resist them. Because one person on the BBC said, "Oh, the police aren't here, let's go and get watches and lots of free stuff." Another intercepted encryption on the BBC said, "All of you, no matter which end you're in," meaning gangs, "should come along for a night of havoc, terror, and lots of free stuff." So that is what motivated the riot. But the level of encryption shows some sophistication in a criminal method. So this is like an agoge, the training school of the Spartans, as a sort of like a testing ground for the future criminals and what future criminals might use as a means to get what they need, which is money, income, and power from demonstrating their power in criminal acts. Now, I don't believe that many of these people are criminal masterminds. They were stealing TVs for crying out loud. But the people who organised it are showing a degree of organisation which is linking the so-called street gangs who've taken their role and structure from American street gangs and then organising them into an effective criminal organisation, although very loosely organised. So that is one danger, but a greater danger is our reaction to it. On the BBC, very worryingly, the UKIP spokesman Nigel Farage said that we should use the army. Well, let me give you a history of whether we should use the army or not. So we'll just take it on that basis. 1. When the poor rates riots in the 18th century happened, we used the army, Britain used the army against the rioters. That led to the Duke of Wellington becoming a Conservative Prime Minister and virtual dictator over Britain for the rest of his reign during his terms as Prime Minister. Many votes were stopped, and overall a trend of militarisation and authoritarianism or totalitarian conservatism came through to the populace, and the populace were suppressed. They were cut down, shot in the streets. So using the army was warned against by both the founding fathers of the American Revolution, and not making the distinguishing thing between the consensual use of the police as an authority, which means that there is a recognised legitimate need for their use by the population, and the army as an unconsensual power. Now, if we use the army, it shows that the police have lost control. It also shows that we would be using something which the EU would not agree to, because of the same reasons as their founding fathers, being mostly English intellectuals and German intellectuals from the English and German university systems, and French bureaucrats. Also, for the same reasons as the American founding fathers made a distinction between the power of unconsensual use of the army against civilian populations, which we are talking about stopping the Syrians using, and yet we're talking about, Nigel Farage is talking about using that against rioters in the streets. Now, the Syrian Arab Spring protesters have a legitimate cause, where the rioters were just being greedy, right? But let's have a look more closely at what UKIP is. Andrei Breivik, the butcher of Oslo, and the shooter at Toya Island, which killed 76 people, got his radicalisation from such groups as UKIP, the BNP and the EDL, who form an ultra-conservative coalition with Exxon, a large oil company, who's been sponsoring them and paying for their things. These people are anti-European. They are Thatcherites, which means that they will infiltrate any organisation that they can to get their aims. And their aim, with extreme elements within the governing Conservative Party, may well be that they want to use the army as an authoritarian way to get themselves back into power, and maybe even take over the function, the army, by de facto, because they're using the government as a proxy. You know, a Trojan horse is the more widely used phrase. So it is very worrying when people start saying let's use the army, and I am firmly against it. There's also practical reasons why we shouldn't use the army. Not all regiments within the army are riot trained. Many are, but others may not be suitable for the use on the streets of Britain. And I should not think that they should be used at all under any circumstances other than in the war, in a war. And let's hope UKIP doesn't have that in store for us. But as I said before in my last video, it's very difficult to deal with three major factors, and that is the multiculturalists stirring it up on the side of the rioters, UKIP's reaction to it, who've used that for their own political benefit, and the BNP and the EDL as that coalition of ultra-conservatives and Freemasons, and also the reaction of the populace, where people want to say, I support the army being used because it makes them feel strong, it makes them feel safe in a time of illogicalness and chaos and insecurity. But let's not use the army, let's use the police, let's find these people, arrest them, prosecute them, and then deport them, whether they're English or any other ethnicity, in the riot. That's what I would do, and that's what I support, because these people broke the social contract, they went against social democracy, and that's what they deserve. They deserve the full force of the law.